The first scream cut through the quiet marina cafe like a blade. It wasn't loud, not at first. It was the fragile, trembling kind of sound that comes from someone who has already endured too much in life. Heads turned slowly, forks froze midair, and the scent of fresh coffee suddenly felt bitter. At a small table by the window, an elderly woman sat trembling as a towering, tattooed man loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her frail frame. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, in standing up for the vulnerable, and in second chances, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in compassion, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach the hearts that need them most. Her name was Margaret Ellis, 76 years old, a widow for nearly a decade. She came to that marina cafe every Thursday at noon. It was the only place where she felt she wasn't completely invisible. Her small apartment overlooked a brick wall, her phone rarely rang, and the silence in her home echoed louder than any storm. But at the cafe, she could watch the boats drift across the water and pretend life was still moving with her. That afternoon, Margaret wore her usual pale blue cardigan and a floral blouse she had owned for years. Her silver hair was neatly brushed back, and her thin hands trembled slightly as she reached for a fork. She had ordered spaghetti, her late husband's favorite meal. It was a small ritual, a quiet tribute to a love that once filled her world. She didn't notice the man until his heavy boots stopped beside her table. He was massive, bald, with thick arms covered in dark tattoos. His leather vest strained across his broad shoulders. His presence sucked the air out of the room. Two other men lingered near the entrance, watching. The cafe staff avoided eye contact. Everyone sensed trouble. Margaret tried to shrink into her chair as the man leaned down, his voice low and mocking. He spoke about tables being reserved, about old women taking up space, about how she should know better. His words weren't just insults, they were reminders of how the world sometimes treats those it thinks are weak. She tried to apologize, her voice barely audible. She began gathering her purse, her cardigan slipping from her shoulders. She was used to stepping aside. Used to being told she was in the way. But the man wasn't satisfied. With a cruel grin, he grabbed the bottle of sauce from her table and tipped it over her head. Thick red sauce poured down her silver hair, staining her cardigan, dripping onto her wrinkled hands. Gasps rippled across the cafe. Someone covered their mouth. A young woman near the window began to cry softly. Margaret froze. For a moment, she didn't move. The humiliation was worse than the mess. The sauce slid down her face, into her eyes, onto her plate. Her shoulders began to shake, not from anger, but from a lifetime of being told she didn't matter. The man laughed. It was loud, sharp, designed to dominate the room. He wanted the spectacle. He wanted to remind everyone that power belonged to those who could take it. Margaret's mind drifted somewhere far away, to a time when her son was small and would run to her after school, clutching her waist as though she were his entire world. Back then, she had been strong. Back then, someone needed her. What she didn't know was that someone still did. Near the entrance of the cafe, a man in military fatigues had just stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his posture straight as a steel beam. His eyes scanned the room instinctively, assessing exits, threats, distances. At his side walked a disciplined German shepherd, alert and steady. Petty Officer First Class Daniel Ellis had returned home only hours earlier. A Navy SEAL with years of service carved into his bearing, Daniel had come straight from the airport, planning to surprise his mother during her usual Thursday lunch. Instead, he saw red sauce dripping from her hair. For a fraction of a second, time slowed. The training in him surged forward, observe, evaluate, control. But the sun in him burned hotter. He saw not just an elderly woman being humiliated. He saw the woman who had worked double shifts to afford his school trips. The woman who sat up through fevers and nightmares. The woman who had waved goodbye at the bus station when he enlisted, hiding her tears so he wouldn't hesitate. The tattooed man was still laughing when he felt a presence behind him. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice, when it came, was calm and cold, the kind that carried authority without effort. The laughter faltered. The room seemed to exhale. The thug turned slowly, his smirk fading as he took in the uniform, the controlled stance, the eyes that held no fear. Daniel didn't posture. He didn't threaten. He simply stepped forward, placing himself between his mother and the men. Margaret blinked through the sauce, confused, her vision blurred. When she recognized the silhouette, her breath caught. She hadn't expected him home for months. She hadn't even known he was in the country. Daniel removed his jacket gently and draped it over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. His movements were deliberate, protective. The cafe was silent now. The two men by the door shifted uneasily. The tattooed man tried to recover his bravado, muttering something about minding one's business. But Daniel's presence made the words sound hollow. Years of discipline radiated from him. This was not a man who relied on volume or spectacle. This was someone who had walked through storms far worse than cafe bullies. Without raising his voice, Daniel asked the men to step back. There was something in his tone, measured, unwavering, that made refusal feel foolish. The thug hesitated. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Power, he realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it stood quietly and refused to move. The cafe manager, emboldened by Daniel's stance, finally stepped forward and demanded the men leave. Other patrons rose from their seats. The balance had shifted. The bullies' control dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Within moments, the three men retreated, their swagger diminished, their exit far less dramatic than their entrance. Silence lingered after the door closed. Daniel knelt beside his mother, taking her trembling hands in his own. He didn't mention what he had seen. He didn't speak of anger or revenge. He simply wiped the sauce from her face with a napkin, his touch as gentle as it had been when he was a boy holding her hand to cross the street. Margaret looked at him, tears mixing with embarrassment. But in his eyes, she saw no pity. Only love. Fierce, unshakable love. The cafe staff brought towels and fresh water. A young woman who had gasped earlier stepped forward to help clean Margaret's cardigan. Another customer insisted on paying for her meal. The room that had once felt paralyzed by fear now felt united by compassion. Margaret straightened slowly, her dignity returning not because the humiliation hadn't happened, but because someone had reminded her she was not alone. Daniel stayed by her side long after the mess was cleaned. He listened as she spoke about the quiet apartment, about the long afternoons, about how sometimes she felt like a ghost in her own city. He realized that while he had been fighting battles overseas, she had been fighting loneliness at home. That day changed more than just a confrontation in a cafe. Daniel extended his leave. He helped his mother move into a brighter apartment overlooking the harbor. He made sure her phone rang more often, calls from him, from neighbors he introduced her to, from a small veterans community that welcomed her like family. The Marina Cafe became a place of healing rather than humiliation. Margaret began volunteering twice a week, helping pack care packages for deployed service members. For the first time in years, she felt needed again. Seen again. Strength, she realized, isn't measured by age or physical power. It's measured by resilience, by the courage to show up even after the world tries to push you aside. And Daniel learned something too. Protecting someone doesn't always mean standing in front of danger. Sometimes it means standing beside them in their quietest battles. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone who deserves a little more kindness today, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Your engagement helps spread stories that matter. And before we end, I have a special request: comment the word respect if you believe every elderly person deserves dignity and protection. Because somewhere out there, someone like Margaret might be sitting alone, wondering if they still matter. Let this be the reminder that they do.